Ladies and gentlemen, I'm told that we're now getting our next speaker online, and I'd like to introduce Cyber Peace Institute. This organization works to safeguard the integrity of the online ecosystem that we all rely on by directing assistance to vulnerable victims of large-scale cyber attacks and promoting greater accountability when those attacks violate international expectations and laws. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Stéphane Duguin, Chief Executive Officer at Cyber Peace. Stéphane, thank you very much for joining us today. It's great to have you. I know that your work is based on 3 pillars: assistance, accountability, and advancement. Could you please tell us a little bit more about your organizations and the choice of these 3 pillars?
Yes, and thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be in Cyber Polygon and to follow such a very interesting discussion. As you mentioned, the Cyber Peace Institute is a newly created entity. We've been set up since September last year. We are set up in Geneva as a non-profit there. And it's an honor for me to serve as the Chief Executive Officer for this entity. So you mentioned stability in the cyberspace. Why? The why of the setup and the why of the focus. I mean, obvious reason that I guess you're going to hear across the next days when it comes to this important discussion is the fact that attacks are occurring more and more frequently, that we see attacks in time of crisis, meaning there's no ceasefire at the moment of crisis, such as COVID-19. There's still what we are seeing for the past year, meaning the disparity in between the capacity of attackers and the capacity of a potential victim to defend themselves, and leaves the population very vulnerable to cyber attacks and with little capacity to recover. And at the end of the day, it's this whole equation in between convergence and abundance versus scarcity and ambiguity. Convergence and abundance of technological assets, usage of exponential technologies, abuse of artificial intelligence, looking into new threat vectors such as brain-machine interface, augmented reality. So the attackers are always on the innovation end, whilst at the same time there's scarcity and ambiguity, for example, in laws, in norms, in how they are applied, how they are understood. It's not that there's enough of them, but it's more in terms of how they're understood in this context to be put in place to have like a very solid framework which would match the challenge at hand. Looking at this from another side, and that's why the Institute has been set up, it's also that the effort to address cyber operations and cyber attacks are hyper-politicized. It's a very diplomatic environment, in fact, the environment that is looking into it. And it's based a lot of time on incomplete or unreliable data. And Nick and Vladimir just told us a lot about the falsehood and the truthness of data, which is quite important also in the field of cyber operations and cyber attack. So having this in mind, we, Cyber Peace Institute, focus to close the accountability gap. And it was reminded by the conversation before. Again, accountability is kind of scarce in the cyberspace. So what we want to do is to identify clear expectation, obligations when it comes to responsible behavior in the cyberspace. What does it mean for state or non-state actors to have responsible behavior? Then looking into these stakeholder commitments to uphold these expectations, how these entities are walking the talk, creating a mechanism in order to track and verify these requirements, and looking into, with the wider community, what are the rewards and consequences when the commitments are upheld or not. And we organize this through 3 pillars of activity. So assistance, accountability at the core, so bridging this accountability gap, and advancement. Assistance, quite simply, is to increase and accelerate assistance efforts towards the most vulnerable. What we want to do is to support most vulnerable communities and be sure that the everyday citizen is going to benefit some capacity to first voice when they are impacted or targeted by cyber attacks, that we don't describe attacks always from the point of view of infrastructure or the point of view of so much money has been lost. This is a story about people, because cyber is about people. And at the same time, also to make sure that what is happening in the field, what is happening on the ground, is useful and used for accountability framework. What do we mean by this? Accountability is collective analytics of what is happening in the cyberspace, because with assistance, we want to be human-centric, but with accountability, we want to be evidence-led. When you focus on human stories, there's a risk to go towards emotion, and what's really important that people share their emotions, but we want to add evidence to this. And these two blocks together, human-centric and evidence, is going to help us to advance international discussion when it comes to norms and regulations. So that's how assistance, accountability, and advancement revolves together.
Stéphane, during the COVID-19 outbreak, you launched this amazing initiative, Cyber for Healthcare, aimed at providing healthcare organizations with access to free cybersecurity services from the partners of this initiative. Can you tell the audience a few words about the project and how they can join?
Yes, thank you for this. In fact, this framework I just explained, we are just not thinking about this in theory, in a vacuum. We want to apply it on the ground and want to make sure that there's an operational feeling of it. Cyber for Healthcare is the first of this operational project. Again, assistance, accountability, advancement. What is happening in the field of attacks, cyber operations or cyber attacks against healthcare professionals today? It's on the rise, it's accelerating, and there's different layers of response. There's a very operational layer, which is how to make sure that this the cyber angle is taken on board for the healthcare professional. That's what Cyber for Healthcare as a project is doing. We are making this match, we're making this match in between the one in demand, could be healthcare professional of any shape and kind, from hospital to vaccine center to nurse association. I mean, the one that are today busy defending all of us when it comes to the pandemic of COVID-19, and want to match their need with a supply, the one that are capable today and willing to help pro bono to be sure that these entities can increase their cyber capacity and move from potential victims to co-creator of the cybersecurity landscape for the healthcare. That's the operational level, but it's not enough. Cyber for Healthcare has other linked activities. We launched, you may have seen this some weeks ago, a call for governments in order for the governments to remind to be reminded to their commitments to protect, for sure, the healthcare professional, but also not to attack. And this call has been signed by Nobel Prize laureates, former heads of states, by very high-profile thought leaders internationally, in order also to call that level. So what we want to do with Cyber for Healthcare is to join this policy call, diplomatic call, with a reality in the field in how we can provide and accelerate support. Something important with Cyber for Healthcare, it started with what we call a Cyber Peace Lab, meaning an engagement with experts in the field, because we wanted to map what is existing. The whole idea is not to reinvent the wheel and to create something that will be already there. There's a lot of activities that are done to protect the healthcare, from government, from the industry, from civil society. You may have heard of this volunteer initiatives such as the CTI League or the Cyber Threat Coalition. We want to be sure that everything that is there is, and as the two keywords, scalable and sustainable. Because what we see across the globe is that it's very difficult to have activities towards the healthcare and make sure that this resilience is scalable and sustainable, and that's the objective of Cyber for Healthcare.
Stéphane, thank you very much for what you do. Unfortunately, we are very short on time here. I believe we have about 1 minute left. Could you please summarize your points in 1 minute?
Yeah, thank you. So as a newly set up entity, we want to have a work that is collaborative. So I will call your audience to reach us, to make sure that if you're interested into this mission, if you recognize yourself into linking this assistance on the ground, this forensic analysis of the attack and how this can influence international law, please outreach. We are now building a network of cyber volunteers. So we'd be pleased to have this engagement with the capable and the willing in order to work collectively to achieve cyber peace. And again, thank you for having us.